Alright guys, welcome to video 2 of the Building a Django website tutorial. Hopefully the last video didn't scare you away. Once you get a project all set up and configured, it gets a lot easier, as you guys will see today. Today we're going to focus on the models section. Django is built on the model view controller framework. So the models themselves are what provide access to the database. They're how the framework deals with objects, storing them. The view layer is responsible for figuring out which objects you want to be looking at, getting them from the database, passing them off to the templates. And then the controller layer is your URLs conf, and that's what decides, based on the URL that you're asking for, which view to call. So today we're going to start that whole process with the models layer. So I've created this kind of small little overview of some models we're going to create. We're going to have a beer app. Everything in Django ends up being an app, so every section of your website would have its own app. If you had a contact page, that would have a contact app. So this app is going to be a beer app. Inside of it we're going to have a beer class. A beer is going to have a name. It's going to have a brewery, which is going to be a foreign key to a brewery class. It's going to have a locality, which can only either be domestic or import, and then a description, which we'll make optional. Similarly, a brewery is just going to have a name and an optional description. So I'm going to bring that over here. We're going to kind of put it behind our window so we can keep it open while we work. So in our project root, we're going to use manage.py to start an app called beers. So we're going to do Python manage.py start app beer. So the convention is that you want to name all of your apps lowercase and then all of your classes uppercase. This comes in handy because oftentimes you'll have a class inside of an app with the same name, so it makes it a lot easier to tell the difference between the two. So once we run that, you'll see that this beer folder was created by manage.py. So we'll go into the beer folder and take a look. We've got models, a test file, and a views. So today we're just mainly going to work with the models. We're also going to add one more file called admin.py, which is going to register our models with the Django built-in admin interface. So let's take a look at the models here. You can see it already imports models for you from django.db, which is nice. We're going to start with a class called beer. That's going to extend models.model. So first we're going to start with the name. So that's going to be a char field. All we're going to do in our models is outline the different types of fields that are going to go into the database and the different types of things an object are going to have. So since this is a database, we have to give it a max length so that when it creates this table in SQL, the beer table, it knows what to do with each field. One thing we're going to add to it is a slug field. The slug field is kind of unique. It's really powerful. It gives you the ability to query an object based on a URL. And you'll see what that means coming up here. But we're going to set it to unique equals true. This is cool because it's enforced at the database level by the framework. So if you try and create two objects that have the same slug, it'll give you an error and tell you that slug's already in use and you have to pick a different one. That comes in really handy when you're trying to pull up objects. You don't want to have two objects that are linked to the same view. Alright, so then we're going to have a brewery, which is going to be models.ForeignKey, and that's going to link to a brewery class that we'll define in a little bit here. We're also going to have a locality. That's going to be models.char field. So this one's a little different. We're only going to give it a max length of 1, and we're going to set its choices equal to beer choices. So up here at the top we're going to have to declare this beer choices variable. So we're going to say beer choices equals, and we're going to give it a list of possible choices that it can be. So we're going to say D is going to be domestic, and we're going to say I is going to be import. So that'll automatically convert. In your templates, you can use this domestic and import. The admin will automatically use them. When you save it back into a database, it'll automatically use the D or the I, so that you're only using one single character, and it has to be one of these choices. And that's all enforced by the framework, which is nice. We're also going to add a description, which is going to be a text field, and we're going to set that to blank equals true, so that it'll be optional. Okay, so one of the things we have to do for every class is define a Unicode version of itself. And I'll show you what this does in just a little bit here. But for this, we're going to return self.name. So no matter what object you're calling, it's always going to return the name field as the definition of itself. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is make the brewery class. And that's also going to extend model, and that's where we're going to get this foreign key is going to link down here to a brewery class. So brewery is going to have a name, just like a beer does. It's going to be a char field. Call it 200. It's also going to have a slug field because we want to be able to pull up all the breweries through a URL. So we're going to give it a slug field, and we're going to say unique equals true again. Then we're going to give it a description, and we're going to make that optional as well with blank equals true. And we're going to define the Unicode version of itself, and that's going to be the same, return self.name. So whatever the name for the brewery is, when you're calling any brewery object, it'll know what it's called by returning the name. So we'll look a little bit closer at what those do in just a minute. So first we're going to write this models.py. We're going to go back up into our project root, and we're going to edit our settings file. So inside of installed apps, we're going to add our beer app. Say now that's an installed app. Once we've done that, we can do python manage.py syncdb. That'll automatically take the model that we just created, create the two tables out of it, where you have app class. It does that all for us. So you can get kind of a better idea of what this does by running python manage.py SQL all beer. So this will give you the SQL that it actually generates to create these two tables. So if you want to do it manually, you can do it that way, or you can use the built-in interface with syncdb to do this for you. You can see it automatically creates all these foreign key tables, does all your indexing for you. It's a really nice self-contained package. So now if we go back into our admin and we refresh it, you can see nothing's new, nothing's changed, because we haven't told the admin about this beer model that we've just created yet. So we have to go back into our beers now, and we're going to vim admin.py. So in here we're going to import Django.contrib.admin, from Django.contrib import admin. And we're going to make a, okay, so let me just show you guys really quickly. We're going to go from beer.models, import beer and brewery. So these are the two classes we just created inside of beer.models. And we're just going to do the most simplistic form of the admin. We're just going to do admin.site.register beer, admin.site.register brewery. So we're going to write that. We'll go ahead and restart the web server. And we're going to swap back over here, refresh, and you're going to see now we have a beer app. Inside of there we have beers and brewery objects. So if we go into beers, you can see there's 0 beers so far, but you have an add beer button. So we're going to add our first beer. It's going to be Guinness. The slug field has to be URL friendly. So we're going to leave it all lowercase, no spaces. You can see initially there's no breweries, but Django gives you this plus button to add a foreign key from the model that references it, which is really nice. So our brewery is going to be Guinness, and that slug is also going to be Guinness. So you can see these slugs here match, but they're not going to fail the unique constraint because it's unique to the model, or to the class, excuse me. So you can have a brewery with the same slug as a beer, but you can't have 2 breweries that have the same slug. So for our description, we'll say this is an awesome brewery. For our locality, it's going to be an import, and we're going to say Guinness is great. So we're going to save that. You can see now we have a beer in our beers list. It's Guinness. All the information we just put in here, so you can modify it, save it. You can see it changes immediately. Go ahead and remove that, save it again. So this Guinness here in this list, and you can imagine this list being huge, comes from this Unicode self. So whenever a model is trying to, or an object is trying to figure out what to name itself, it's going to look for the Unicode version of itself, which in this case is the name. Okay, so if we go back into our beers here and look at the breweries, you can see we've also created a Guinness brewery. It's got all the stuff we just saved. Alright, so I'm going to go through and add a few more beers just to make this tutorial a little better. I'm going to cut out and come back in a minute here. Alright, so I've gone ahead and created a few beers in the back end here. I've also added a few breweries that link back to those beers. This is going to help us kind of see what the admin actually does in a minute here. So what we're going to do next is go into our beer app, and we're going to edit our admin file, and we're going to create a custom class that's going to define some extra things that go into the admin. So we're going to call this class beer admin, and this is going to extend admin.modeladmin. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is a pre-populated field, and we're going to use that to pre-populate the slug field off of the name field. So what happens here, the next thing we need to do, we need to give this a model that extends model admin. So in our admin.site.register, we're going to say the beer model, or the beer class, and we're going to use beer admin. So that's going to pass this beer class to model admin, so it's already going to know all the fields that are in a beer and say automatically pre-populate the slug field from the name field. So let's write that. Let's go over here, kind of refresh this, just add a new beer. So I'm going to add Bud Light. Okay, so I need to restart Apache before this is actually going to work. Alright, so let's try that again. So let's go home. Alright, so welcome to what a Django error looks like. So this is telling us that we've improperly configured the admin. Okay, so field slug must be a list or a tuple. So let's figure out why it's doing that. Because we're missing a comma after name. So you have to pass it a list. You guys can read about how all this stuff works on the Django website, djangoproject.com. I'm more going to focus on demoing it. So let's again restart our Apache server, refresh our admin. Everything's back to normal. We're going to beers. We're going to add a new beer, and I'm going to add Bud Light. So you can see now the slug field automatically fills itself in with a slugified version of what we put in the name. That's something that's really useful if you're interacting with clients, things like that, giving people access to the admin and they don't know what a slug is. And you can actually hide this field, have it automatically fill in, which is really nice. So we're going to Anheuser-Busch. This is a domestic. So now we have a slug field that automatically fills itself in. And we're going to do the same thing for brewery. So we're going to do class brewery admin. It's going to extend admin.model admin. Pre-populated fields equals slug, and we're going to pre-populate that from name. And then in brewery, I say you should use brewery admin. Alright, so next let's take a look at what list display does for our admin. So in our list display, we're going to pick which fields are going to show up. So for here we're going to do name, let's do brewery, and let's do locality. Okay. Start the server. So right now you can see it's just names. When we refresh this page, you can see the breweries and the localities now show up for all the beers. So you can click on brewery and it'll automatically reorganize them. So you can imagine if this list was hundreds long, this would be really useful. Alright, so let's add a search field to the admin now. So we're going to go back into our admin file. Here we're going to do search fields equals name. Alright, so we'll restart. When we refresh this, you'll see a search bar that'll pop up at the top here. And that allows you to search anything in the name field. So if I type in Bud, you'll see I get Bud Light, Bud Light Lime, and Budweiser. So that's really useful when this list gets really long. And you can add other fields to it, have it search locality, brewery, description, things like that. But for now, we'll just leave it at name. Alright, so far we have created models that define a beer class and a brewery class. We've registered those classes in the admin. We've added some extra conditions to our admin to kind of make a nicer interface, do some more powerful things than straight out of the box. Now what we're going to look at is the shell. And so this will be our springboard into looking at views. So Django provides an interactive shell that allows you to query all the objects in your database just as you would from a view. So you can use the shell to really kind of figure out how you're going to build your view, but you're still really interacting with models. So from our project root, we're going to type python manage.py, and we're going to invoke the shell just by typing shell. So let's clear all. Alright, so okay, so just like in a view or any other file really that needs access to a class, you need to import your classes. So we're going to say from beer.models, you can say import star, and that'll give you all the classes inside of the beer models, or you can actually specifically name them. Either way will do. They both do the same thing. So now what we have is a beer class. You can see brewery is a class. So beers.models.brewery, beers.models.beer. So the dir command will tell you anything you need to know about any kind of object or class or anything that you can interact with. It will tell you all the options that you have. So if we do dir beer, these are all the things that you can do to a beer. So most of the time when you're dealing with classes, we mostly use objects. So we could say beer.objects. Actually, let's run a dir on that so you guys can see what that does. So inside of our beer.objects, these are all the things you can do. You can get or create. You can get values, value lists. You can have an iterator over the objects. You can get a specific object. You can filter, things like that. So let's start by looking at the all method. So we're going to say beer.objects.all. And you're going to see all the beer objects that are going to match up to these beers right here that we have in the back end. So each one of these is a specific beer. So we can say, we can assign that to a variable now. So if we say beers equals beer.objects.all, beers is now this list. So this ends up being a zero-based array that you can access individual elements at. So like Guinness is at position 0. So we can say Guinness equals beers at position 0, and let's look at Guinness. So now we have an individual beer object, and this one is particularly Guinness. So let's look at what we can do with Guinness. So we can say Guinness.id. We can say Guinness.brewery. We can say Guinness.name. Guinness.description. So these are all the fields that match up directly to here. So Guinness.slug, for example. If we say Guinness.slug, you can see you get a Unicode string that says Guinness. It's the same string as right here. So if we say Guinness.brewery, you can see brewery is Guinness. So let's do a dir on Guinness.brewery. And here's all the things that you can do. So this beer set here is really neat. We have a foreign key from Guinness beer to the Guinness brewery. The Guinness brewery itself doesn't have a foreign key back to the beer, but Django allows you to follow reverse foreign keys. So you can say, take the Guinness brewery and show me all the beers that link to it. So we can say Guinness.brewery.beer set. If I could spell brewery right. So this tells you you've got a related manager here. So if you actually run a dir on there, you'll figure out you have to do .all. So you can see the two beers that link to the Guinness brewery. So from our Guinness beer, we can look at the brewery and then look at all the beers that link to the brewery. So it's really powerful with the relationships that you can create just by using a single foreign key between objects. Alright, so we still have our beers variable. That's the list of all of our beers. It's beer.objects.all. So now we can do things like for beer in beers, print out beer. So you see all the beer objects that show up here. So you can say for beer in beers, let's get beer.brewery. So you can see this prints out the brewery for each beer in this list. Another really common way to interface with classes is to use filter instead of all. So we can say, let's do beer.objects.filter, where locality equals import. And now let's do the same thing but with domestic. So you see the two different lists that we can create of all the filtered objects that are either domestic or import. And inside of filter you can access any of these variables that are hooked up to your class. Additionally, you can also get a single object. So we can say beer.objects.get, where let's say slug equals Boddingtons. You can see we find the beer Boddingtons. Now there's a problem that Django has. If you try to get a single object and multiple objects are returned, it's going to throw an error. So you have to make sure. That's where that unique constraint on the slug field really comes in. So if we say something like beer.objects.get and we say locality equals I, this is going to be a problem. It's going to tell you get returned more than one beer. It returned 2. So whenever you use get, you're trying to find a specific single object. Every object automatically gets a primary key. So if we do Guinness.pk, you see it's 1. So if we say beer.objects.get pk equals 1, it's going to return Guinness. So there's all different kinds of ways that you can interface with all the objects that are stored in your models. And this is really the springboard of what we're going to use to link models to views. So all this stuff that we just did here is very similar to what you would do in a view. And we'll get into that very shortly in the next video. So thanks for watching and stay tuned.